Welcome to Reformed Thinking, where we take a fresh look at essential insights and unpack fascinating concepts.
Mm.
Each deep dive we do is, well, custom tailored for you, our listener, cutting through the noise to bring you the core of what truly matters. Today, we're taking a close look at Psalm 4, guided by the classic insights of Matthew Henry. Now, at first glance, this passage might seem like a very personal prayer from David, maybe tied to a specific struggle he was facing. But as we'll soon discover, Henry helps us see it as something much broader, really, a practical spiritual guide for anyone who seeks God.
That's exactly right. What's so compelling here is how this psalm moves beyond, just one king's situation. It offers timeless wisdom for godly living that resonates with all of us today. Our source material really sheds light on David's quite unique role as a spiritual guide, the actual nature of true happiness, and the often overlooked necessity of self-reflection.
So, what's our aim today? It's really to grasp how Psalm 4 functions not just as a prayer, but as a lesson shaping our worship, directing our behavior, and refining our desires, all while drawing a clear line between a heart faithful to God and one set on the world. Let's begin our deep dive. Okay, let's open up this psalm then. Matthew Henry describes Psalm 4 as a powerful piece, and interestingly, he notes it isn't tied to a particular historical moment or crisis, but instead is designed for the general instruction of God's people. What does that tell us about its value for us even thousands of years later?
Well, it tells us a great deal, especially about David's unique standing. You see, Henry shows us that David, much like his son Solomon later would, actually acted as a royal preacher, which means his psalms weren't just personal expressions of emotion or devotion, though they certainly contain those elements. They were also formal public teachings, lessons designed to instruct God's people in matters of doctrine and practical living. They gave clear guidance for navigating life faithfully and aided them in their communal worship. Think about it. A king, divinely appointed, not only ruling his people, but spiritually guiding them through song and verse. This song in particular seems to speak with the voice of wisdom to all who hear it, making it a general guide, not just a historical response to something specific David went through. Henry notes that while some psalms do address specific occasional events, many, like Psalm 4, are created with the specific aim of instructing God's people across all times and circumstances. And that means its messages apply broadly, assisting believers in their regular times of devotion and directing them in their everyday choices. It's truly not limited to David's personal circumstances alone, but speaks to universal spiritual realities that, well, we still grapple with today.
That's a fascinating insight. So, David really wore many hats here, didn't he? Far more than just king or poet. What were some of these distinct roles he filled as a spiritual guide for men, according to our sources?
Well, first and foremost, he steps forward as a preacher and teacher. His psalms, crafted by divine inspiration, were definitely intended to instruct God's people. As a royal preacher, David's compositions were designed to teach principles of faith and guide behavior, in addition to being devotional outlets. He used his psalms to confront and reason with sinners, hoping to move them toward repentance. For example, he boldly challenges them later in the psalm to consider the sheer folly of their disregard for God. Beyond that, he also functioned as a convincer and a reprover. He directly addresses the children of men, and that seems to mean humanity, maybe especially those of high standing or influence, to bring about their conviction and, if they are still far from God, their spiritual transformation. He seeks to highlight just how illogical their ungodliness truly is. He clearly points out the harm they inflict not only on God's honor, but also critically on their own souls. It's a forceful call for self-examination, revealing the destructive path they're on.
Okay. So, preacher, teacher, convincer, reprover. What else?
Then David acts as an exhorter and a counselor. He consistently encourages people to serve God and to place their complete trust in Him, while also issuing stark warnings against sinful paths. He advises them to apply both a healthy reverence for God and, sound reason to turn away from sin. He specifically counsels them to truly make conscience of their duty, which means to live with deep integrity and moral conviction in their responsibilities, specifically by offering the sacrifice of righteousness and placing their confidence in God alone. And in all of this, David also stands as a model of godliness. He clearly illustrates the wisdom of desiring God's favor above all else, showing quiet confidence in God's careful oversight. His personal experience of finding joy in God's favor provides a compelling example of the blessedness of a godly life, demonstrating that genuine joy is a gift that only God provides. He truly lived out a complete reliance on God's protection and care, which allowed him to rest securely no matter his outward circumstances.
Right. That's quite a list of roles.
And perhaps most importantly for us in understanding his legacy, he was a pivotal instrument of worship. He was centrally involved in establishing the very divine order of psalmody. He wrote these psalms, under divine inspiration, for the church's communal use, and then delivered them to the chief musician for musical performance. This highlights his distinctive, God-appointed position as a leader in structuring public worship. His role extended to setting up different classes of singers, each with a leader, and defining their specific responsibilities in the house of the Lord. His compositions became the very core of the sacred songs used for giving thanks and praising God. This really underscores his crucial, God-appointed position in establishing the formal worship practices of Israel.
That paints a very rich picture of David's spiritual leadership and authority. Now let's consider how these psalms were initially presented in worship. What was the musical and liturgical scene like during David's time, and how does Henry contrast that with the New Testament era?
Well, the Psalms were specifically delivered to the chief musician, or master of the song, which reveals a highly organized structure for temple music. This particular psalm, Psalm 4, was designated to be sung on Neginoth, and that's a fascinating detail for us. Neginoth literally means with stringed instruments played by hand. So it's not. You can picture ancient Israel's version of a worship band, right there in the temple, creating this powerful sound to accompany the words. David played a significant part in forming these various groups of singers, each with their own leader, and outlining their specific functions in the temple's musical service. Some singers, for instance, were designated to prophesy through music, others used the harp for praise, and some were appointed to use the horn. All were instructed in the songs of the Lord, indicating a detailed, almost, orchestral arrangement.
Interesting. So it wasn't just spontaneous singing.
Not typically in the formal temple setting, it seems. Our sources suggest that in the Old Testament temple worship, primarily the trained choristers sang, not usually the general congregation. But here's where Henry makes a truly striking comparison. He highlights a distinct shift to the New Testament model of worship. In the New Covenant, Christians are all called to sing. The emphasis is on melody in the heart, rather than purely on elaborate musical artistry or extensive instrumental accompaniment. This moves the focus from outward display to the inner spiritual posture of the worshiper. Henry views the Old Testament instrumental accompaniment as, less necessary now because the core of worship is on a heartfelt, reverent sound, emanating from the Spirit, rather than on technical musical display. While outward expression is still present and valued, the inner condition and sincerity of the worshiper is what truly matters most in the New Testament. This signifies a more personal, internalized form of worship.
Okay, that shift is certainly significant. Let's move into the psalm itself. Before he turns to address other people, David first turns to God in prayer. His opening plea in Psalm 4, verse 1 is quite telling. What does this reveal about his relationship with God and his expectations?
It reveals a profound intimacy and a clear understanding of divine grace. David begins by requesting what Henry calls a generous audience from God. He's asking for his adoration to be accepted, his petitions to be granted, and his appeals to be justly judged. His specific words are, "Hear me when I call, O God of my righteousness, have mercy upon me, and hear my prayer." He views any notice God takes of his prayers and any positive response as purely a gracious act on God's part, not something he's earned or deserves. David provides a powerful model for us here. When we approach God, we do so with a clear expectation that he will listen. He's not just speaking into thin air. He anticipates a response, which is a clear sign of his deep confidence in God's faithful character. His very first words are a heartfelt plea, setting a tone of utter dependence and trust in God's willingness to respond. He knows he relies completely on God's kindness.
And it bases his plea on God's mercy, right?
Absolutely. He deliberately places any hope for God to hear his prayers, and for any favorable reply purely on God's mercy. He states, "Hear me for thy mercy's sake," as his very best and strongest plea. This clearly underlines a correct theological understanding. All good things, including the hearing of prayer, flow entirely from God's unmerited favor. He doesn't appeal to his own goodness or his past deeds or any sense of personal deservingness. Instead, he appeals directly to God's inherent kindness and his readiness to show favor to his people. This truly reflects a deep theological understanding and a humble heart, that God responds not because of who we are, but because of who he is, a God rich in mercy and grace. It's a powerful reminder that our standing before God is always by grace alone.
David also uses that striking phrase, calling God the God of my righteousness. What does this powerful statement signify? It's a pretty bold claim, especially given David's, acknowledged imperfections later on.
That's a great question, and Henry unpacks it beautifully, showing it's not David claiming his own goodness, but something much deeper about God's character and his work in him. It signifies two primary aspects. First, it means God is the author of David's righteous qualities. He's the one who, by his grace, has made David a righteous person. David humbly recognizes that any good or upright dispositions within him are not self-generated. They aren't the result of his own effort or inherent virtue, but are entirely the fruit of God's sovereign work. It's God who, through his grace and spirit, has transformed him into an upright man. This humble recognition attributes all spiritual goodness and moral rectitude directly to the divine source. It's a deeply reformed theological point. All true righteousness in us comes from God.
Okay, so God is the source of his righteousness. What's the second aspect?
Second, and this is a great comfort, God is the patron of his just cause, the protector of his innocence when he is wronged. David is committing his entire situation to God, trusting him to reveal his uprightness as clearly as the light of day. This brings immense comfort when David faces unjust human judgment or false accusations. He finds peace in the knowledge that it is God that justifies. When worldly systems or individuals condemn him unfairly or persecute him for his faith, David rests in the assurance that God himself stands as his ultimate vindicator and defender. God is therefore both the source of his inner righteousness and the advocate for his righteous dealings in the world. It's a comprehensive statement of dependence and trust in God's justice and his sanctifying work.
And David doesn't stop there. He also appeals to God's past actions. How does David's recollection of past deliverance strengthen his present request for help? It feels like he's building a case.
He is, in a way. He pleads, "Thou hast formerly enlarged me when I was in distress. Therefore now, Lord, have mercy upon me and hear me." This shows his clear, confident trust that God, who has helped him before by expanding his heart with joy and providing outward relief, will continue to do so. It's a powerful argument rooted in God's unchanging character and faithfulness. David specifically recalls how God set him at liberty from hardship, both by literally bringing him out of trouble and by filling his spirit with comfort, even while he was still experiencing distress. This past experience serves as both a great encouragement for his faith and hope and a solid, undeniable basis for his current plea. He is, in essence, making a faith statement, saying, "You did it before. You are the same God yesterday, today, and forever, so you certainly can and will do it again." This isn't just wishful thinking. It's a logical appeal based on God's consistent nature and his historical interaction with his people. It reassures him, and us, that God does not abandon those he has previously helped.
Right, that makes sense. It's confidence based on experience with God's faithfulness. So after his personal communion with God, David shifts his focus, turning his attention to the children of men. He seems to challenge them quite sharply right away, exposing what he calls their folly. What are these particular ways in which he says they act illogically?
David lays out a threefold illogic, almost like a lawyer presenting a case against irrational behavior. First, he says they debase themselves. By neglecting God, they are acting in ways that are fundamentally irrational and completely unbefitting their noble human nature. They are failing to use their very powers of reason and conscience, which God gave them. The term sons of men often refers to humanity in general, maybe especially those who hold a certain level of dignity or intelligence. David is urging them to consider and show themselves men, to act in a way that aligns with their created dignity rather than ignoring the very source of their being and purpose. They are, in a sense, acting beneath their own station as rational beings when they disregard the Creator.
Okay, so debasing themselves is the first folly. What's next?
Second, he argues they dishonor their Maker and turn his glory into shame. This happens in multiple ways. By disobeying God's commands, by neglecting his freely offered grace, by giving their affection and devotion to created things that belong only to God, by profaning his name through careless living, and by denying him in their deeds, despite perhaps professing to know him with their lips. It's a direct assault on God's character, his worth, and his rightful place. By substituting fleeting temporal things for the eternal Creator, they diminish his rightful majesty and distort his pure radiance, bringing disrepute upon him in their actions. This can even include ridiculing his word and ordinances, treating them with contempt.
And the third folly.
And third, they put a cheat upon yourselves. David says they love vanity and seek leasing or lying. This refers to their pursuit of worldly things, such as material wealth, power, and sensual delights, which in the end will only deceive and ruin them. They set their hearts and deepest desires on things that will prove to be utterly empty and false. He asks them, with almost a sense of exasperation, "How long will you do this? Will you never be wise for yourselves?" This isn't just a rhetorical question. It's a direct challenge to their self-interest, as they are actively harming their own true good by pursuing what is fleeting and ultimately destructive. Henry points out that the God of heaven considers the time long that sinners continue in such self-destructive patterns. It highlights God's patience, but also the gravity of their misguided priorities. They are chasing mirages, and the wellspring of true satisfaction remains untouched.
That's a stark warning. But then David pivots, doesn't he? He offers encouragement for the godly. What special favor and protection does God extend to those who live righteously? And what are the implications for those who oppose them?
Yes, he shifts focus beautifully. David speaks directly of the peculiar favor which God has for good people, stating clearly that God has set apart him that is godly for himself. This means God has sovereignly chosen them in his eternal purpose, called them effectively by his Spirit, and distinguishes them through his special providence and grace. They are truly his set-apart and sealed ones. This relationship signifies that God actively secures his special interest in them, marking them out as his very own. They are, as Henry puts it, his peculiar people, purified unto him and consecrated for his purposes. This unique connection with God means he cares for them in a way he doesn't for the ungodly.
And the implication for those who oppose the godly?
Well, the implication is a strong warning. Those who oppose or persecute the godly are, in essence, fighting against God himself. God considers any harm done to his people as touching the apple of his eye, a deeply sensitive and precious part. He will surely respond to defend them, making their attempts to harm the godly futile and ineffectual. It's like a divine shield. But it also serves as a powerful encouragement to become godly. For those who turn to God and live righteously, God promises to hear them when they call to him, granting them direct access to the King of Kings. This special access to God's ear is a privilege that far surpasses any earthly influence or connection. Knowing this, godly people should never separate themselves from the one to whom they are so uniquely connected, because he is their constant defender and helper.
After that powerful warning and encouragement, David issues a call to introspection and a warning against sin. What two key actions does he advise to prevent sin and encourage this kind of self-reflection?
He advises first, stand in awe and sin not. Now, this isn't just a casual fear. It means cultivating a deep, holy reverence for God's majestic glory, and alongside that, a holy dread of his righteous wrath. This awe serves as a potent remedy against carelessness in our actions and thoughts, and as a crucial guard against deliberately provoking God. It's about maintaining a constant, conscious awareness of God's majesty and the serious, weighty consequences of displeasing him. It's being moved by his character rather than acting flippantly or with a false sense of security that neglects accountability. This fear is a healthy, humble recognition of God's greatness and our own smallness before him.
Stand in awe. Okay, what's the second action?
Second, he calls for them to commune with your own hearts. Be still. This requires serious self-reflection and pious meditation, especially when one is alone, such as upon your beds, a time when the day's distractions often fade. It's about deliberately examining one's conscience, identifying what needs amendment in one's life, and calming one's spirit to genuinely listen to what the heart reveals. This solitary time, perhaps before sleep or during sleepless nights, is for scrutinizing one's actions, identifying wrongdoings, and intentionally focusing thoughts on what is true and good. It calls for a quiet, composed frame of mind, allowing for true introspection rather than being swept up in external noise or internal chaos. Henry suggests that a person who takes time to truly think and reflect is on a good path to becoming wise and good. It's about processing life and examining our own spiritual condition before God.
That's a profound call to internal discipline. Finally, in this section, David provides very clear counsel for living righteously and trusting God. What specific duties does he call for in these verses?
David counsels them to make conscience of their duty by offering the sacrifice of righteousness. This isn't merely about ceasing evil, which is good, but actively doing good. These are works that flow from an upright heart, acting as sincere expressions of love for God and neighbor. God, Henry explains, does not accept the offerings of the unrighteous. True offerings must originate from a sincere, righteous heart. These sacrifices of righteousness are essentially good works, the visible fruits of a reigning love for God and neighbor, and all instances of a genuinely religious way of life. They must come from a heart that is truly set right with God, unlike the empty rituals or outward shows of those whose hearts are far from him. It's about living out our faith in every area of life.
So righteous actions flowing from a right heart. And what else?
Following this, he advises them to put your trust in the Lord. This signifies serving God without any hesitation or fear of loss, without holding back. It means honoring God by relying on him alone, trusting his providence and his sustaining grace, rather than depending on worldly wealth or human strength or ingenuity. This trust should be absolute, a complete reliance on God's divine care, rather than trying to establish one's own righteousness or sufficiency. It's a call to depend solely on God's sufficient grace for all things. for our provision, our protection, and our purpose. Rather than leaning on our own limited understanding or resources, this allows for a deeper peace and a more faithful walk.
Okay, now this next part, section 4, is where it gets really insightful, I think. David draws a very sharp contrast between worldly desires and the desires of a faithful heart. What is this foolish wish of worldly people, and what are its drawbacks?
Yes, this contrast is central. Many worldly people, David observes, ask, "Who will show us any good?" Now, this isn't a search for spiritual or lasting good. Rather, it refers to a desire for visible, outward, and temporary blessings. They long for the increase of their corn and wine, which really signifies material wealth, sensory delights, and outward prosperity. Their inquiry is specifically for good that may be seen, a seeming good, a sensible good, something they can touch, taste, or accumulate. They're looking for, well, superficial satisfaction.
The drawbacks of that kind of thinking.
Well, the drawbacks are very clear. First, they show no desire to turn to God, who is the only true source of genuine and lasting good. They seem to prefer to receive good from anyone other than God, demonstrating their willingness to live entirely without Him. Second, they seek only what can be seen, showing no regard for unseen faith-based good, the spiritual realities that nourish the soul. They settle for any good, meaning any outward, present, or partial good, rather than the chief good, which is God Himself. Such a pursuit is a profound form of illogic, as it ultimately leads to emptiness. Henry warns that their consequence will be to receive only these transient, fleeting good things in their lifetime. He quotes, "Son, remember that thou in thy lifetime receivest thy good things, the penny thou didst agree for." This kind of mirth, derived from worldly things, is described as but a flash, a shadow, utterly lacking true substance or lasting satisfaction. It's a short-sighted pursuit that leaves the soul famished.
That's a stark portrayal of worldly pursuit. Now, in direct contrast, what is the wise choice that David and other godly people make, and how do they express it?
David clearly distinguishes himself from those worldly individuals, stating that material wealth, no matter how abundant, will not truly satisfy his soul. He and those who adhere to God earnestly desire God's favor as their highest happiness, their ultimate goal. Their prayer, which is a powerful expression of this desire, is, "Lord, lift thou up the light of thy countenance upon us." Now, this isn't a casual request. It conveys their primary and most fervent desire, a deep longing for God Himself. This choice is an earnest seeking after God's favor as their ultimate happiness, something more precious and satisfying than life itself and all its earthly comforts combined. It represents a spiritual turning away from the world's false promises and a focused yearning for God's approval and presence.
And this prayer, "Lord, lift thou up the light of thy countenance upon us," what exactly does it express?
It expresses a deep desire for God to be at peace with them, to fully accept them, and to reveal Himself to them in a way that truly satisfies them with His loving kindness. It's a collective prayer, prayed by David on behalf of all God's people, reflecting a unified desire for God's presence as their chief good. Henry points out that all the saints throughout history approach the throne of grace with this very same earnest desire. They are unified in seeking God's favor above all else. This isn't just empty words. It's a specific and sincere prayer that they believe is sufficient to make them genuinely happy. It's an acknowledgement that nothing else, no worldly attainment, can bring the kind of lasting joy that comes from God's approving gaze. How does God's favor translate into this tangible inward experience of joy for the godly? Is it just a feeling or something more? Oh, it's much more than just a feeling. David testifies, "Thou hast hereby often put gladness into my heart." This isn't a superficial or fleeting emotion. This joy is described as inward, solid, substantial, and truly unspeakable. It springs directly from the communications of God's favor and His grace within the heart of the believer. This spiritual joy vastly surpasses the temporary, fleeting mirth of worldly people, even something as outwardly cheerful as the joy of a plentiful harvest or abundant wealth. True joy, as David states, is God's gift. It's not something the world can give or take away. When God puts His grace in the heart, He also places gladness there, a deep internal satisfaction that simply cannot be matched by external circumstances or any worldly pleasure. It's an inner wellspring of contentment and delight that flows from the knowledge of God's love and presence, regardless of what's happening outside. It's a joy that truly sustains.
That's an incredible comfort. Finally, in this section, how does David express his complete confidence and peace in God's protection as a direct result of experiencing this favor?
He states, with beautiful simplicity, "I will lay myself down in peace and sleep." He can rest with the same profound satisfaction or even greater than those who possess abundant worldly goods. This is because his security is found entirely in God's favor, not in his circumstances. He feels utterly safe because he knows, "Thou only makest me to dwell in safety." Even if he were completely alone, or if all other defenses and human strength failed, God alone is entirely sufficient to protect him. This means his very soul returns to God and finds its ultimate rest and quietude in him. He's completely free from fear of disturbance, able to sleep quietly and securely, precisely because God himself is his constant protector. Henry beautifully compares this to Boaz resting after a plentiful harvest, but David's peace comes from a far greater, more reliable source.
Does this peace extend beyond just daily rest?
Yes, Henry suggests this confidence extends even to what he calls the sleep of death. David is assured that God will receive his soul and keep his body safe in the grave, promising a resurrection. It's a future-oriented peace, knowing that God's care extends beyond this life. He commits all his affairs, his daily life, his future, his very being to God's careful guidance. Because of this, he can rest easily, knowing God will oversee all things for him, and that ultimately all will work for his true well-being if he remains in God's affection. Just as Simeon in the New Testament could depart in peace having seen the Lord's salvation, so too the believer trusts God for peace in death. This surrender to divine providence means he can sleep and rise night and day, just like a farmer trusting his seed to the ground, leaving it all to God's sovereign care. It's a picture of perfect, quiet reliance.
That's powerful. This deep dive into Psalm 4 truly offers so much to consider for our own lives. What specific ways does Matthew Henry suggest we apply these truths as believers, bringing them from concept to, well, practical living?
When we consider these verses, Henry urges us to preach to ourselves the clear messages contained within. The provoking nature of sin, the empty, unsatisfying nature of the world, and the vast, immeasurable happiness of God's people. This means actively reflecting on these doctrines, allowing them to truly sink into our hearts and fundamentally shape our perspective on life. We should, on a daily basis, consciously remind ourselves of these truths as we go about our lives, letting them challenge our assumptions and redirect our desires. It's not just a mental exercise, but a spiritual one, where we internalize these realities.
So internalizing the truths, what about actions?
Right. He also calls us to press upon ourselves certain duties. These include cultivating a godly awe, having honest conversations with our own hearts through self-reflection, and offering spiritual expressions of worship and good deeds. In our prayers, we should consistently ask God for the grace to think and act according to these truths. This is about making a conscious effort to live out the practical implications of what we've learned, seeking God's help to align our thoughts and our actions with His written word. The spiritual expressions we offer are not external rituals, but the genuine fruits of an upright heart, true expressions of our love and obedience to God. It's a call to live a life that mirrors the wisdom of Psalm 4.
So it really is about shifting our perspective entirely, isn't it? Away from fleeting worldly pursuits and squarely towards God himself.
Precisely. It encourages a holy disregard for worldly wealth and pleasure, a clear recognition of their deep inadequacy to bring genuine, lasting happiness. Instead, it prompts us to earnestly seek God's favor as our highest good and to find deep comfort in that alone. This means actively recognizing that the things the world offers cannot truly satisfy the soul, and then deliberately choosing God as our ultimate source of joy, peace, and contentment. It also promotes a quiet, confident acceptance regarding our worldly concerns. We are called to entrust all our affairs to God's guiding care, confident that He will oversee all things for our ultimate well-being if we continue to abide in His affection. This truly leads to a deep, abiding peace, knowing that God is intimately involved in and orchestrates everything for those who genuinely love Him.
What stands out to you from this deep dive into Psalm 4? For me, it's that crystal clear distinction Henry helps us see. Pursuing visible, fleeting good versus yearning for God's countenance. It's a choice that defines everything about our spiritual orientation.
Yeah, that's huge. For me, it's the great assurance that God is not only the very source of any righteousness within us, but also the faithful defender of our just cause, and that the true joy He provides so greatly surpasses any earthly pleasure imaginable. That's a comfort that truly sustains.
It certainly does. So as you reflect on this deep dive, consider this. How might genuinely communing with your own heart in quiet moments and seeking the light of God's countenance above all else shape your sense of peace and security in the days ahead? That's all for this deep dive from Reformed Thinking. Until next time, may you be sustained by the joy that only God's favor can provide.